If other people join, they can pick it up as they join in. Good afternoon, everyone. We're welcome to Mission Insight session 3 of our series on Mission Insight learning. Today we'll be focusing on the next steps as far as using Mission Insight for your parish. In terms of the things to look at for your own parish as you start delving around in the reports. Questions to ask, things specifically to focus on as you go deeper and start to apply the lessons you're learning to your particular parish and what that looks like. So bear in mind the webinars from our previous webinars are all recorded, and they're available on the Mission Insight page of the diocesan website. Just go to edow.org/Mission Insight, and this session will be recorded also and made available on there. As far as questions, you can ask questions using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your window, and us those during the session will be addressing those as we go through the session and at the end. So feel free to ask any questions you have. Today, Todd Thomas here on the diocesan staff is presenting on the Mission Insight webinar today. So Todd, let me hand over to you and take it away.
Great, thank you. I do know a few of the names on the list of attendees, and I want to begin with a word of prayer and then just do a quick introduction to myself, and then we'll jump in on some of the things that Peter was mentioning. So let us pray. Ever-living God, whose will it is that all should come to you through your Son, Jesus Christ, inspire our witness to him, that all may know the power of his forgiveness and the hope of his resurrection, who lives and reigns with you in the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen. I want to begin with a quick introduction for some of the people I've not had the opportunity to meet. I am Reverend Todd Thomas. I'm on the diocesan staff. I am your missioner for parish revitalization and young adults. So I've been on staff for about 5 months. Those of you who I do know, I probably met through some of those circles of young adult meetings and campus ministries. So it's good to connect with you again today, as well as we move into next year and the implementation of our diocesan strategic plan, then we will really be digging into some parish revitalization together and revitalizing ministries across our diocese. So the Mission Insight tool, and Peter brought a lot of us in at the very beginning of this. So we've been working together to bring Mission Insight to the diocese, prepare everybody for using it. And then also something we do a lot up here at Church House is we spend time with Mission Insight, looking at demographic reports, running reports for different parishes and bishop visits and things like that. So some of you may have been in a meeting when the bishop visited and you saw a power page or a little one-page summary of some of the things that we found and we're looking at. What we want to do with this time today is make sure that we are making everybody feel comfortable with exploring and really charting some new territory with Mission Insight. You've been through the how-to. We're probably not going to talk a lot about the how-to stuff today. You've had a couple of seminars on that, but we want to talk a little bit about the why, and we want to talk a little bit about the whatnot, and getting really rolling with it. So one of the things that we identified early on with Mission Insight is that this really is an opportunity to love our neighbors by knowing them better, to really understand where our neighbors are at, gives us the opportunity to love them more specifically, to pray for them more specifically, to live out God's mission in this world among our neighbors in far more specific, actionable terms if we know more about them. And simply as one of their neighbors, sometimes being in the neighborhood or in the community, we can get surrounded by some things up close and lose sight of some of the larger issues going on around us. And we're excited about Mission Insight data because it gives us another set of tools to use to understand what's happening within the communities around our parishes and better reply to them. So I'm going to assume you're here because you're amazing. I guess that's not even an assumption. That's like a given, right? That's like solid bedrock foundational knowledge. You're here because you're amazing. You have dug in to Mission Insight with us. You have committed some time and some energy. And I'm going to guess you, even with fear and trembling, hopped on and you created some reports. So I want to talk about those reports going in first and setting up the reports, radius versus polygon. And I know you've been faced with that option, and you probably have sat back and gone, I don't actually know if I need to do a 1 mile radius, a 2 mile radius, if I need to draw a specific polygon around some things. So what I wanted to do was talk about the easiest ways to get started with that and move forward to really understand the communities around you, and then also really bring home, we're going to say this many times today, run a lot of reports, run multiple reports, look at these demographics in several different ways, and then see what themes begin to resonate, what similarities you see, and make note of the way that some things will change as you run your reports differently. So one of the things we do up here when we're looking at a parish, we'll often begin with a large radius view and just pick up the general area around the parish. I did this recently. Most Sundays I serve at St. James in Potomac. We had the bishop coming to visit, and I had to make a power page for the parish where I'm normally serving. So I worked with the rector there to kind of get an idea of where people were coming from. And I know in seminar number 2, or webinar number 2, you all learned how to plot members on maps. We haven't done a lot of plotting yet. St. James is not plotted. So what we did, and this is another opportunity that's quick and easy, we just pulled a directory out and started a scan of the zip codes. From the zip codes of people coming to that parish, we identified, like the big picture view of where folks are coming from, like the furthest reaches of that parish's reach. I started with an 8-mile radius. Now that's huge, especially in a more urban context. You can get away with that up in Montgomery County, probably over in Prince George's and in Southern Maryland. You would never go 8 miles from the city center in DC because that'd be all of DC. But we started with a wide angle view, and then we began to run smaller reports within that. So what this allowed us to do, beginning with the big picture view like that, and then come down, is we got the overall view, and that's not even 10,000, that's about 40,000 feet view. We saw all this area around the parish in a big radius. And then, out of curiosity, I went in and drew a polygon around the immediate neighborhood right next to the church building, right next to the parish building. And I was curious, will it change a lot? And some things did change. So, and it kind of broke one of the long-standing assumptions I had about the area, which was just how Jewish the area was. We are in a corridor up there, especially on 7 Lots Road where the parish is located, that the corridor is visually very Jewish. A lot of Jewish religious activities on that street within a block or two of the parish building. And so when you talk to people, they say, well, the neighborhood's all Jewish. So that 8-mile radius, the Jewish population with that entire radius was only about 4%. When we took it down to that one neighborhood right next to the building, it only went up 1% or 2% of the total population. And in point of fact, the exact same mosaic groups, and we'll talk about mosaics, I know you've looked at them, the top mosaic groups in that 8-mile radius were the exact same 8 or the exact same top groups within that neighborhood. However, what shifted were the concentrations of those top groups. So one group in the 8-mile radius that only made up 15-20% of the population actually became around 60% of that immediate neighborhood. So the immediate neighborhood challenged some of our thinking when we looked at the demographics, and it also allowed us to then pinpoint a present group that we could very specifically target with messaging and with methodology. So start with that big radius, find some smaller populations. I did the same thing, not only with the big neighborhood right next to the parish building, but I also outlined just a few blocks. I drew a polygon around a tiny little area right up on 270, very close to the parish building, where Founding Farmers has a restaurant, and I believe it's called Park Potomac, and they've created a new little tiny micro downtown. You've seen some of these little micro city centers popping up. I drew lines around that, and I found a lot of the same mosaics, but I found a total shift on what the dominant mosaic was. So when we looked at the two areas, even though it was in this big radius area, you can easily see how we would target one neighborhood differently from the other neighborhood. We would probably offer different programming. We would, according to the information from MissionInsite, try to communicate with them differently. The mission remains the same, but some of those visions for how we live it out and practice it can shift from time to time. Do want to mention too, it's easy to get caught up in this and think, well, this is, really for my numbers people, or who in my parish is all about research and doing numbers and things like that. I want to challenge that a little bit and throw this out. Who in your parish is an intercessory prayer leader? Who is all about praying? They do intercessory prayer during your worship. Maybe they are often overdoing healing prayer on your service mornings and during the services. What would it look like for you to bring them in on this conversation and tell them that you've got a new tool that can very specifically pinpoint their intercessions and bring to a whole prayer ministry the idea that we have a tool to really fashion and design the way that we pray for the people around us. Of course, God knows them, and of course, God knows our hearts and knows their hearts, and it's not a big cosmic vending machine where we have to have the correct change, but it's going to change us to be able to pray more specifically for communities that way. What an amazing way to practice the way of love, than to overlay that rule of life onto a deeper knowledge of the people around us. Another way to get started, and just a couple more things really fast on running reports, and then we'll talk about the different reports a bit, is check for some population trends. You could start with a big radius like that and then choose some areas within it. So then that begs the question, well, how do I choose what neighborhoods to come back and do a more focused deep dive with? So what you do is back out of the reports and run a thematic map. And click on that button sometime, roll over into it, and then look at all the different demographics that you can use, the different metrics you could use to create a thematic map. You could look at an area, let's say you want to look at where population growth is trending. You could pull up a 2019 to 2024 trend projection on areas where population growth is going to happen. And maybe then you say, well, that is a neighborhood as it identifies a place. Go back into the reports and draw a polygon around that neighborhood. If there's going to be significant growth, then that may be a place where you want to dive in. Perhaps as you look at the mosaics, you find that, you know what, we're really geared to, right now, we're ready to minister to this group of people. As I read the mosaic reports, I see that it really resonates with the population of our parish. I see that this group is automatically going to be drawn to the type of programming that we're working on. You can run a thematic map to find that demographic. So once you find them and locate where they're at, then you can target your messaging, target some of your outreach efforts to the people that you already kind of have an idea that we're going to resonate with them and want to bring them in. And finally, I'm going to say this many times, do it multiple times, run multiple reports. The diocese is super happy to have provided all of MissionInsite for you, free of cost. I know it's been mentioned, and we'll bring it up later, the only time that you would ever have any cost would be to purchase some mailing addresses for a direct mailing. If the target audience is going to be amenable to direct mailing, then do it. Make something nice. We have Christmas coming up. I know the Advent beginning in just a couple of Sundays might be a tight squeeze, but you can begin thinking strategically now about Lent, thinking strategically about Easter, thinking about, as one of the times when so many people go to church who may not go to church ever, except for Christmas and Easter. Who are those demographics and how can you target them? And run a thematic map to find them. And use some of that information then to decide where you want to invest your money to do that outreach and how you're going to respond to them with programming, with welcome when they do come. So as we move on, just again, multiple reports. Whenever we do this for a parish and begin to build a page for the bishop to have that kind of overview and general idea of the demographics and the changing situation around one of our parishes, we're doing this out of multiple reports, multiple different ones, and multiple views so that we really have an idea of where people are at and where inroads might be able to be made. So I am going to drink my hot tea as we move on, just because I'm doing a lot of talking. want to talk about the full insight report. That's one of the first options you have, and it's honestly the place where I begin. So the first thing I look at is the full insight report. And there are a few key things that we want to find from it. It is going to begin to form our 10,000-foot view, our big general broad strokes idea of what's going on within an area. And I will say that as I've done this across our diocese now many times, I am both, I find it affirming that there are themes which carry throughout our diocese, but I'm also finding it very affirming that different areas and locations do yield different results. The information is really specific and it is really trustworthy. These are not just things that are thrown across every single report you're going to get. I always begin, I have a notepad and I have a pen. I run these reports, I pull them up and open them and I start reading. And then I start jotting down the notes that step out to me and really resonate. But I want to mention that one of the first things I look at is one of the first charts in the full insight report. And that is the chart on population growth trends and diversity trends. And they're going to tell you pretty much right off the bat, is the area you're looking at an area of slow growth or moderate growth or tremendous growth? And if you've gone through and done thematics and then targeted your polygons, you may already know that there's a lot of growth happening in this area. As you dig in, I encourage you to kind of like chew on some of the data after that, because you're going to be able to parcel out, is this growth of families or is it growth of new people coming in? You can look at the charting and kind of compare the two. You can see growth going up here, but numbers of households staying here. Well, then you're talking probably about not new folks moving in as much as you've got a lot of families who are going to have another kid in the next 5 to 10 years. And some of the other reports will help you bear that out. And then when you look in the mosaic data, you find out, oh yeah, this is the demographic that is having kids. They are the ones who are building their families, putting down roots. And so you begin to form in your mind some of the initial sort of ministry dreams, ministry ideas, beginning just with a look at the diversity and the growth trending of your population. Number two, I always look at some of the economic trends. Those are going to come back later. They'll figure into the Ministry Insight report is usually one of the last ones that I look at as I go through my reports. But I do like to know kind of what's going on with the economics within an area I'm looking at. It begins to form the type of ministry programming and messaging that we want to have among people. Three, and this is maybe the most important thing, is in that full insight report, you're going to have a breakdown of the mosaic groups in that study area. And I know you've been through some of this and had it introduced to you, but we're going to talk about it just a little bit more. The mosaic groups are super important. If it bugs you that people talk about generations a lot and base a lot of things on generational talk and generational terms, I totally agree. I resonate with that. I'm kind of over it. I'm a Gen Xer. But this mosaic group list includes 71 groupings and 19 categories. So they've taken a lot of information. I believe it's like 300 plus data points to bring people into certain groups and demographical groups, to really study them and do the deep dive on what's going on in their lives, where they're at in building families, where they're at in communications. Those groups become super, super important. And for understanding the mosaic groups, there are a couple of tools. Again, you're awesome. So I know in your amazingness, you have looked at these, but once you begin to identify those mosaic groups, you've got the Mission Impact Guide, and then you also have that e-handbook. What is it called? I have them both. Yeah, it's the Mosaic e-handbook, which is a PDF. Now, you link to that PDF directly from the full insight report, and it opens from one of the Amazon servers. And I know you saw this. When you click on it, it takes about 5 minutes to open that monster PDF. Go ahead and bookmark it. Make sure that you have it there available so that you can go back to it and you don't have to open one report to then bring up that e-handbook. You want to have the e-handbook handy. And then let me see. If I click on this, how do I share my screen? Is that at the bottom? No. Well, maybe in just a minute, we'll take a look at those. If you want to help me learn how to share my screen, Peter, then we can do that in just a moment. We can take a look.
You should see that down the bottom in the middle, Todd, and there should be a share button.
Oh, sure. Awesome. All right. So thank you, Peter. I'm going to go here to sharing. So it looks like I've got a little bar here that you are seeing it. And I am going to open over here. So this is that Mosaic USAE handbook. When you open it up, it is a monster PDF, so it takes a while to load. What you can do is when I'm reading that full insight report and I'm jotting down notes, I always make notes of my largest Mosaic groups, okay? And it's different from study to study. And the bigger the radius or the bigger area you're looking at, the more diverse that can really become. You may have listed out a dozen different Mosaic groups. So what I try to do is grab the big trends. So if I've got a group that represents 20%, 10%, 12, 15%, I will start grabbing those upper level groups until I have a critical mass. And for me, that's usually around half the population. I find that that is usually no more than half a dozen Mosaic groups. Now, the smaller the study, then I end up maybe with just 2 or 3 groups, because it gets into more specific areas and we only find one. So like when I mentioned doing the studies for St. James Potomac, that 8-mile radius and then the neighborhood right next to it, the dominant group in both was maybe only 13% in the 8-mile radius, but it became close to 60% in the neighborhood right next door. So, you know, you can go in there and then study about that group. So the e-handbook here, you can go through, you can read about some of the demographics and the data metrics they use, the way that they separate the groups. You can get aggravated with the weird names they gave them. Believe me, we've all been there with you. And then you can go in and begin looking at some of their quick snapshot information on that group. So I was looking at one suburban style. Some really cool things here. You pick up some age information, some type of properties, households, incomes. Channel preference right here is super important for us, because that's where we want to talk about the ways that this Mosaic group gets their information is going to then begin to form the way that we try to reach out to them.
Todd,
go ahead.
one second. Yeah. I'm seeing your desktop screen rather than the document.
Oh, really? You're not seeing my web browser?
No, I'm seeing the. So what you need to do is make sure when you share it gives you usually windows to share. So just share the. You just share the document you have, because it gives you different window options to share. So if you go back,
I appreciate you letting me know.
Yeah.
So I've got Safari Unknown. So you just look at a cool retro Apple wallpaper. All right. Do you see the D suburban style page?
No, we're still looking at the desktop.
Really?
So you might want to stop sharing, and then so when you share, just go back to the document window.
Yeah, I got 13 attendees going. I'm listening to this guy on tech now. You bet. How about now? Do you see that suburban style?
I'm seeing there's a blank screen right now. I'm not seeing anything.
Yeah, that's what it didn't show me a preview when I went to share that web page. I just have whiteboard, desktop 1 and desktop 2. So I tell you what, let me do this then. While I try to work on some of that, I will actually full screen that web page and see if that creates a shareable. And if not, and then we'll just go ahead and mention the Mission Impact Guide is something that you link to from the MissionInsite website. It's a lot of the same information, but it has taken the time to create what is, oh, I see. I'm getting held up by computer preferences and the recording. So let me see if I can give it permission. Oh, okay, well, it won't let me do it. It says until I restart Ring Central, so I won't do that. So we'll just stop sharing. And I invite you, if you want to check that out, the Mission Insight website does link you to the Mission Impact Guide. That is a different kind of view because they have taken the time to take all that mosaic information and create a prose or a narrative flow from it. This is really important for me because when we create a report for a parish, we're trying to create basically a narrative flow, a prose, a story. And that's what the Mission Insight report does. You can grab that group by group and learn some information about the type of communication that this mosaic responds to. You can learn some of their deeper ideas about society, politics. It goes into the way the way they like to be led. So the type of leader that's really going to appeal to this group. And then, you know, especially for parishes in transition, if you're looking or in a search process, wow. So to look at the surrounding audience, the mosaic groups around your parish, and be able to tailor somewhat your staffing towards the kind of leadership that they're going to respond to, you can imagine that that would be an amazing opportunity. Well, let's move. I want to move on from full insight report. We can talk about the religious insight report. There's some really cool things in there. I always like to. It's a popularity. It's God's approval poll is really what it starts off with. How do the people in the community think about God? And I am affirmed in that often the majority of people have very positive views of God. Another thing you'll learn in the Religious Insight report is that doesn't always translate into a positive view of the church or me as a Christian or myself as a Christian leader. So we're able to dig in, see what they're thinking about God. It goes even deeper into population's views and the rate of change within the population on their thinking of Jesus, their thinking on the role of religion in society. It will dig into some of their more moral views and the way that that relates to society and politics. Something really important from it is you really pick up the idea, some of the trusted numbers on really what it calls religious preference and religious affiliation. So religious preference and religious affiliation, these are interesting numbers to look at. I always start with the religious preference, and across our diocese, Peter and I have talked about this, and I bet this resonates for you as you look at it. The largest group in almost every report I run is the nuns. Those are the ones, and I combine a couple of numbers there. That's the no religious preference, and that is the I'm spiritual, but I prefer not to be religious numbers. And so bringing those two together, and honestly, one is usually around 30 and one's usually around 3 to 5. You're talking a third of the population of most reports I have run. The predominant religious preference is none. So they just don't have any preference, no inclinations, no go-to religious, option. Now, then you get to the religious affiliation. And that's a little more of a rubber meets the road type of chart, because now the question is asked, well, are you affiliated with one of your preferences? And that's where you find the numbers drop even further. So maybe, after the nuns, you almost always have the Catholic presence, and then you'll have the Baptist presence. And then you'll have a bunch of those little things. Okay, great. Peter threw the link for the e-handbook up. Awesome. Thank you. I could have done that. I didn't think about that. It's my first webinar. You can begin to look at some of those preferences and how they actually play out in daily life among your mosaics. And you can then, one of the last things you see within that religious insight report is just how much of the population is active with the religious community. And you can see some of the trend work that they've plotted, say, over the last 10 years, the last 5 years, the last different reporting periods. You can see how that has changed. Nationally and by state, that is almost always a dropping number as well. We almost always see a decline, a trend for fewer people to be engaged in religious communities today than they were 5 years ago or 10 years ago. Something to be aware of with that is from demographic report to report, an area I've looked at that has been quite drastic at times. So I have seen some areas outside of DC and inside DC where that's been a pretty strong drop off in the last 5 years. That people are, in fact, one parish is sort of in an area that I kind of thought, man, you know, I thought of the song "Losing My Religion." This parish was surrounded by a couple of younger demographics, big concentrations of these two Mosaic groups, neither of which fall into much preference on religion, and neither of them fall into any participation almost whatsoever with religion. Now, one of the things that we learned from the reporting was that one of those two demographics, they were almost the same size. They were each about 25%. So you're talking, this is half of the population surrounding a parish. One group was extremely resistant to religion, and the other group was wide open and willing to listen, willing to give an audience. So to know who those groups are and kind of how they're laid out geographically around the parish and around the community can be super valuable for moving ahead. Because the last thing you want to do is burn a bunch of energy and time with a fantastic message that's going to the wrong people, or going out in a way that they're not going to hear it. And so we begin to pick up some of the religious insight is going to tell us sort of what's going on. And typically I see at tops 40% of communities are involved in a religious organization or a faith community within their neighborhoods. So there's a lot of work out there to be done. You can also look at some of the trending and kind of see that you know, there almost always is a percentage of people who are going to be making changes within the coming years. And strategically, what we want to do is have ourselves positioned for people in those times of change, those times of transition, so that we can help with that. We can minister to them. We can bless them in the midst of that, and also become a part of the new community they're building around their change. Religious Insight Report, I burned through there looking. Ministry Insight Report, if you only look at 3 reports, the full Insight Report, Religious Insight Report, and then the Ministry Insight Report. The Ministry Insight begins to help us draw some of the intersections through things. So a couple of things here to really think about when you're going through it is you can learn, right off the bat, you begin to pick up some of the reasons why people are not in faith communities. So that's where you can begin to cross-reference your full Insight Report and some of the other numbers, but also we're picking up from the different mosaics, the reasons why they have left church or avoided church. And a lot of times it comes down to the fact that we fight a lot, the fact that we always talk about money, or the fact that their view of Christians is trending to be more on the judgmental side. So a lot of times what we're doing is we're working to regain the trust and communicate the relevancy that we find in the gospel to the people around our parishes. So to do that, something that comes out of the Ministry Insight Report that's super important are areas of anxiety and concern for our neighbors. So because these reports are based on a lot of economic data, we know how people are spending their money. We know what they're searching for. We know who's advertising to them. And in many ways, we know which advertisements they're responding to. So the report's going to be able to bring out some real needs within the community. And some of them may resonate with you right away. Some of them may surprise you. It probably doesn't surprise you that across the board, towards the top of the list, there's always concern about personal health. And health crises, healthcare costs. In some areas, that tends to move over towards weight loss, physical fitness. Some demographics are way more concerned about the medical care costs of aging parents. So that's a big one. Depression tends to come up a lot across the studies that we do. People, we are living more and more insulated and isolated lives in many ways. And it's one of the reasons that a tool like this really gets us excited up at Church House, because we can dig in and see, as isolated as we tend to sort of make our lives today, we can still learn about places where we can bless and touch people's lives with a good news that we affirmed in our baptismal covenant. So the Ministry Insight Report can tell us about areas of anxiety and concern, and then really kind of follow up on that. What's kept them out? of the church? What are the areas where we need to regain trust and confidence of the people around us to begin to bridge that gap, to begin to create an audience, to earn the right to speak back into their lives, the relevancy that we have found in Christ, the relevancy that we have found in a faith community, and becoming a faith community which supports families, builds people up in these needs and concerns. We find the overlay there, and we begin to think strategically. So it is 2:44. I want to talk about a few things here on really getting started with this, okay? And I know, I wish you could like give me a little thumbs up or something to give me little emojis there so that I know that I haven't already killed you all with all my talking. But I have heard that the question comes up like, where do I really get started? What do I begin to do with this information? So as I said, I know you're awesome, and you've got a slew of reports out on your desk or table right now in front of me. They're spread across the coffee table, your living room floor, because you never quit working. Want to mention the e-handbook again and the Mission Impact Guide. And I want to say, remember those mosaic groups. They are sort of the key to moving forward with doing some strategic thinking about programming and messaging, okay? And this is where I want to mention again, things like channel preferences. You can go to the e-handbook to see a little breakdown graphic of their channel preferences. And again, that's the way they like to receive information. But the MissionInsite Guide, Mission Impact Guide, there's so many of these words all crammed together. The Mission Impact Guide is really good in the narrative about saying that they do want to receive a direct mailer. And there are a surprising number of mosaic groups who are ready to receive a direct mail. And even within groups, there's some inclination, you know. I would never say it's a complete waste of time, almost, to direct mail a neighborhood. There have been a couple of very small pointed neighborhood studies I've done where it was pretty obvious that just a very small percentage, I mean, we're talking of the overall group, maybe only 10 to 15% are going to look at that direct mailer. Most of the time, you've got a pretty sizable chunk of mosaic groups who are going to look at the direct mailer. They're going to see what came in because they are plugging in to lots of different kinds of information, media, and modes. You can learn about that within, especially the Mission Impact Guide, moving forward ways to communicate with people. The next thing I would say is dig in with people in your parish. If you run a MissionInsite report and you're looking at these reports and you do the full insight, you do the religious insight, and you do the ministry insight reports, and you've got a sheaf of notes now, some things have really resonated with you about people's concerns, the place in life where they're at, and the kind of programming that would really speak to them. Ask your people about that. Check with your people and see if it resonates with them. Find out who within your parish are falling within those mosaic groups. Now, if you've plotted your parish, then you may be able to do that without, you may be able to plot them within groups without asking them much. But still, bring some people around and say, hey, I'm kind of wondering about the concern around, you know, transportation costs. And maybe if transportation cost is a major concern in my area, and this is a predominantly blue collar area, and this is an area which struggles with money issues, then perhaps this becomes something that the church can be known for, assisting people with. You know, find out if they resonate with saving money for retirement, if they're at a place where that really speaks to them. And if it is, begin programmatically to think with them about how you address those concerns within the parish before thinking about addressing the concerns with somebody outside the parish. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but what that's going to give you is the opportunity to really internalize the information you're getting as a parish, and then also build some ministry participants and ministry leaders from within the parish who are going to be able to support programming you might decide to do for outreach to bring the demographics in. If it resonates within your people, that's amazing, because they can not only benefit from addressing the concerns, but they become the foundation for doing the outreach with programs based on those concerns. I want to circle back around to prayer group ministry. I would really encourage you not only to run the reports and dig into them and pray yourself around these reports, but I would say bring some people together to pray over them. Bring them together. Look outside of MissionInsite. Look at if MissionInsite brings up something so dissonant to the way that you thought things were going within the neighborhood, or such a surprise that you just can't mentally stop thinking about it. Go out and find out who else is addressing these needs. I guarantee you, other people are looking at these reports. Businesses are pulling exactly these kind of reports because they're trying to decide where to put a sandwich shop, where to put a grocery store, where to put the next Gold's Gym. They're pulling the reports to see what's on people's minds. Do they have the money to support the endeavor I want to do? And then, so how do I get in there and communicate with them so they know where to find me? I really hesitate to speak in crass terms like that about church, because this is a completely different thing when we engage the mission of God. However, we're not doing mission to bring in dollars. We're not doing this to raise a financial bottom line, but we need to understand the financial situation of an audience we're talking to. When we talk then about the programming we want to invite them to do, you would not go out somewhere and promote the program, say a spiritual retreat that costs hundreds of dollars to attend to people, to try to bring them in if they're not going to have the financial means to be a part of that ministry or that programming. So get some good people together to pray about this. I was really surprised. The next one is identify a local event where your parish can participate. And I know this is nothing brand new. This is nothing obvious. But what I knew from being a pastor is that I could, it really came in seasons for me, community engagement and community involvement. I would go out and be somewhere. I would be within the lifeblood of a farmer's market that was getting off the ground. I was in downtown Bethesda. So I was in the group which conceived of and kind of birthed out Bethesda Green in downtown, which was a sustainability movement with business partners in town. And I would go out in these tidal waves and seasons and become a part of different events. But then what would happen is people would start tapping on my shoulder and knocking on my door and calling my cell phone. And next thing I know, it would be 6 months before I'd gone somewhere out. And the other day, just a few weeks ago, a couple months ago, back in September, I had the opportunity to join an evangelical church, not one of our churches, but an evangelical church in Columbia Heights, had planned to go out and do a prayer walk around the neighborhood. And I got the invitation via the bishop. I dropped in and went walking with him. But I showed up in Columbia Heights like 30 minutes early, okay? Because I didn't know for sure where I was going to be able to park. I didn't understand the instructions they sent to me. And so I showed up and I found a spot. I happened on the Fiesta del Barrio, second annual Fiesta del Barrio. This was put on by a clinic focused on Spanish-speaking population in Columbia Heights, and it was focused on their healthcare needs and concerns. And so it brought together all kinds of amazing things: food trucks, vendors, clothing items, jewelry. There were live, the Malcolm X drummers, I think, were there. There were Latin bands playing live music. It was amazing. It was like a couple of blocks in this beautiful older neighborhood, just kind of off of 14th Street. I can't remember the name of it. But I walked up and down that festival going on Sunday afternoon. And I was amazed to not find a single religious faith community represented there. And there's a lot of churches in Columbia Heights. One block over, I was meeting with the evangelical church plan for a prayer walk around the neighborhood. And I'm like, wow, what an amazing opportunity for us to simply show up and bless people. And that's really about raising the visibility of our parish. It's about raising authentic engagement with the community around our parish. It's reflective of the mission of God, that as a people we're called, but we're also sent. And so that feels very daunting, but most of the time people are going to be welcomed into our parish communities and our faith communities by invitation. So how can we go out? Where are the local events going on? Get weird about it. Go to ones you've never been to before. Go to ones where you might not immediately think of going. look at the needs from the Ministry Insight report, and then run some searches online to see if anybody's doing anything, but I guarantee you there are. And what you're going to find are ministry partners in places like the clinic putting on this fiesta down in Columbia Heights. And then find out how you probably fairly nominal cost to get involved and be there. Peter and I were laughing today. Living in downtown Bethesda, it felt like we had a pet festival every other month. There was a walk your dog, a downtown dog, a taste of Bethesda, 4 dogs. There were all kinds of things going on constantly. We don't have to wait for October every year to bless pets. We can get out, we can have a table, we can have a presence, we can bless, we can enjoy, we can bless our neighborhoods all the time. And finally, the last thing I want to say here is take your time. There is absolutely no expectation from church house staff or from the diocese that you're going to become this amazing demographics wizard sitting in your cave with your crystal ball and computer and cranking this stuff out and doing amazing things by January 3rd. Take your time, run some reports, pray over them, reflect on them, bring in some other people to be a part of them. Peter and I were talking this morning, maybe craft a strategic plan with MissionInsite to say, you know what, the first quarter of next year, while we're kind of plowing through the winter months and the coldest months and getting through Easter, we're going to run some reports, sit with them, really chew on them, digest them. We're going to run some more reports. We're going to consider those reports. We're going to really spend some time. We're going to share them with some people. We're going to host a dinner where when people come up, we give them good food and a MissionInsite report and ask them to kind of flip through and see what they're thinking, what resonates with them, so that we can do a mailing by Easter to a neighborhood that invites them, say, hey, come and do this special day with us. And when they arrive, they find out, oh, you know what, you've got a program meeting this need, bringing the relevancy of the gospel to the forefront for their lives. This isn't something that we really expect anything to happen overnight with, but it's going to inform the way that we grow and move forward and journey with our neighborhoods and our local communities. And I guess the finally would be, I'm available if you want to sit down sometime and do a report together and chew it over and do some notes and dream strategically about what they mean. Please reach out and let me know. I would love to be a part of those conversations. I don't know, out of the 10 to 15 attendees we've had coming and going, how many parishes that represents. But let's do this, because again, we don't have to do it all by December 1 or January 1. Let's take some time over the next few months. Let's get together and prayerfully dream about some things. Money is honestly, most of the things that we would jump out and do are not going to be held up by money issues. They are easy to do. And we have a high tolerance. I think, or if some don't, we need to develop a high tolerance for trying some things out. They don't have to all be home runs. They're going to be mission because we're out with people in their lives. That's everything I was going to cover, Peter. I know we wanted to try to maybe do some question and answer. We've got started a little late. We got a few minutes late. So if you're able to hang with us a few more minutes, we can do that.
Yeah, everyone, the Q&A button is in your webinar window, so you can see that and type any questions you have. We don't have any questions at this minute. There's a few things I just wanted to mention. Todd, that was a great amount of information there, and I hope if you look also in the chat, in the webinar window at the bottom under chat, you'll see that I've posted some links there. One is to the Mosaic Handbook that Todd mentioned, and also the Mission Impact Guide. The Mission Impact Guide, as Todd mentioned, is a great resource. In addition to the e-handbook, it really is a great resource for kind of guiding you through those different population groups and demographic groups, and really kind of giving you the landscape. And as Todd and I were talking earlier, a lot of it is about finding resonances with the resonance points with your local community. And Todd, as Todd was speaking, I was thinking about the the early Christian community is after Jesus died, and the the disciples there going out into the community, not having a handbook, not having a guide, just kind of getting out there and having to bless people, having to teach them, having to get out there and spread this message that they didn't have great resources, but it did take a great deal of courage and faith. And part of this is about stepping out, perhaps outside of the place that maybe used to being. So this tool is something new to many parishes, but as Todd mentioned, it is data and information about the community that businesses and organizations everywhere are drawing on. This is corporately available information that goes right down to the block by block level. So it really is particularly valuable as far as knowing down to the smallest level what your population looks like, and what the values and lifestyle and what's important to them, and how they like to be communicated with, what sort of leadership they might resonate with. And one thing I wanted to mention also is just an add-on to that is about welcoming. And Todd, you mentioned about welcoming and reaching out into as you kind of engage with the community, is about preparing for welcoming. So some parishes have, for example, initiated the Invite, Welcome, Connect program in their parish, and that's a very an excellent program. It's been well tested and tried. And to get into the practice of really welcoming each other as well as welcoming people, so that it's not just about talking always to the same people, but about having hospitality among each other, people who you're not necessarily always connect just to the same people in your community, but you're used to being a community that's welcoming to any person who's new or person who's there in the parish, so that you get into the culture of invitation and welcome. As well as making sure that your presence, whether it's your web presence, your social media presence, and your building itself is a welcoming place. And that as you look at how you're going to be reaching to particular groups in your area, that that your website, that your social media is in resonance and is in tune with the group that you're reaching, so that if you have an area that's very strong in families, that if they come to your website, that and you're trying to reach families, that you have information that's on the website and images that resonate with families, that the information is culturally sensitive. If you have a very diverse community, that you can try and portray diversity on your site in a way that's genuine, but also in a way that's welcoming and respectful to different cultural communities that you're perhaps trying to reach and try to speak to. So there's different things to look at there, and certainly we can help you look at these things. And as Todd mentioned, he's certainly available to walk through the MissionInsite steps and the process with you if you're kind of like starting out on this and feeling a bit overwhelmed. Or if you find you're working through it and you're having success or want to take it to the next level, then share those stories with us by all means, because we would love to hear your adventures with MissionInsite and how you're experiencing it. These webinars, as we've done them, we've had a lot of feedback, a lot of great feedback, and certainly we've been sharing the story of this initiative around the diocese and have had a lot of excitement and enthusiasm. So we look forward to continuing this work as we go forwards with this initiative. Each of these webinars is, as I mentioned, is recorded, and we'll be posting this one online on the MissionInsite page of the diocesan website. In the chat window, as I mentioned, there is the e-handbook, the Mission Impact link, and also Todd's contact information, his email address. So you can get in touch with Todd or contact me about any specific questions. So we'll be posting that. So Todd, if there was anything else as we're kind of wrapping up here that you...
The only thing I would add is maybe that if anybody wants a copy of the notes that I made for this, I can make that available too. just email me if you want,
Okay.
and I will send it out to you. But definitely, I hope I didn't take the fun out of this. This is really fun to do. You know, it's fun to dig in. It's fun to learn more. And it's actually exciting to see that there are a lot of openings in people's lives where we can meet them authentically, and find Christ in our midst and communicate that gospel. So yeah, prayerfully and joyfully, we want to be here to support that.
Great. Thank you both. Thank you, sorry, to Todd, and thank you everyone for joining us today. And I know that there were many who couldn't join us today, and they'll be looking forward to watching this online. And please stay in touch again with us as you have questions and continue to explore this. We're more than happy to help you with any of the areas that we've discussed. In addition to that, if you run into issues with the system as you're using it, you can reach Mission Insight support directly at misupport@missioninsight.com. So they're always available as well with particular issues using the system. So feel free to reach out to them. That's all part of our agreement with them, that you guys can reach directly to them, or reach out to us if you need kind of more specific work with your parish community in working with this. So thanks everyone, and we'll be in touch again.
All right. Thanks, Peter. Thanks all.
Bye.